Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, I've got a shocking and intense story to share with you. She would put on her underwear and run home to hide her secret from her husband. But what was the secret? Today, we will tell you life stories and accounts of how wives are forced to use different ways to take pity on their husbands. Are you ready to find out the truth? I want to tell you a very ambiguous story, although some might not call it ambiguous. It was about a kiss, and you can say 100 years ago, which resulted in a worse than nuclear war. To help you understand the whole picture, I am 40 years old, my wife Elizabeth 36, and of course, has a child 10 years old. Everything is fine with money and so on. The beginning of the whole story, if of course, you can believe my dear wife, was one evening on February 23rd. Our colleagues in the organization and I, of course, congratulated each other. A little by the evening, we celebrated the whole thing in the workplace. The girls at work set the table for us. I call my wife. Liz, we are here. Well, this is the very little. If you have a chance, after work, come straight here for me. We'll celebrate here a little bit. Well, you can pick me up and drive, so I don't have to leave my car here. I'm good. If I'd known how this simple request of mine would end, I wouldn't have drank at all, and I would have picked up whoever and wherever I wanted at once. Long or short, the dinners at work that night were also a humbling event. They were there too, congratulating the staff. In general, we had more bottles of cognac that evening than expected, and some of our young people here began to play the bottle. Well, like young people play, and we are older just for fun. We are sitting. Anyway, I think it's time to write to my wife. Where are you? She's texting me. I'm getting in a cab. I'll be right there. Okay. I take some more cognac, stand closer to the exit. There's a window, at least to get some air, and the sleeves on my shirt, of course, are already rolled up. Mine and everyone else's is fine. All of a sudden, one of our youngest madams comes up, and she calls me by my name and patronymic. Anyway, there's that bottle there pointed at me, and she kind of has to kiss me here, and in general, not really expecting an answer from me, takes my chin right with two hands and kisses me, without taking away from me and turning her head to the staff. Well, sort of, so that they can see that she has completed this task. Well, as you have already realized, of course, at this point, my wife walks in as well. Oil painting. We're kind of standing there with this madam, just the two of us. It all looks like we stepped away from the collective for some business. We both smell of alcohol. Well, the last moments of the kiss, I think the wife saw perfectly well too. I pretended as if nothing had happened. There really wasn't anything going on. I had nothing to do with it, but it wasn't. While Lisa and I, my wife and I were in the car, we were talking as if nothing had happened. In fact, I figured we'd probably talk tomorrow, if we talked at all, and for nothing. The next day, my wife was already blacker than a cloud. I somehow explained to her what it was, and after a couple of days, she, kind of believed me. I exhaled, but it turned out far from that. A month goes by to 6 months, and every time, on occasion, and without it, my wife immediately reminds me of this case, and because of these reminders, fight more. I told her if she did not forgive me, she could have told me so, instead of forgiving at first, and then reminding me every day. As soon as I said that, and got really angry, she immediately took a step back, saying that she was kidding, and that she would relax. But if the quarrel again, she immediately reminds me of it all again. In short, found a string, how to act on the nerves. Here, so to speak, as it is impossible, I turned out to her something like a promotion. She had been working in a jewelry store, and after an employee in their larger office went on maternity leave, Elizabeth was offered the job. The neighborhood was a little farther from home, but the pay was higher, and so on. I generally agreed without asking me, and the schedule was from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., and the schedule was 3 days through 3. I, by the way, paid attention at once. It was the first time I had ever heard of such a schedule, but later found out what kind of schedule, what hobbies, except work, there were dinners. Anyway, it's been a year and a half, and then she walks into our lounge in the evening, and says, I'm sick of it all. I honestly, at first I thought the conversation was about work. You don't give me any time or attention at all. Well, don't make promises that you will now. You're an adult, you can't be changed. I've made up my mind, I've been thinking for a long time. In short, the point is that I have to go out now. Of course, I'm shocked. The next day, I try to talk again, and she is not, all in the same spirit. Torture my presence. To cut a long story short, I was not going to torture anyone. I decided to go to a friend's house for a couple of weeks at their empty house. It happens that people get bored with each other, and as a result, we make up. But it turned out to be much more interesting. We are sitting with a friend at this dacha, and with his encouragement, we come to the conclusion that there is something for a reason. It has been a week and a half. The wife, in terms of communication, doesn't even scratch the surface. Yes, and crowned, we need a break from each other. In such stories usually means something else. Anyway, I think, did someone show up? My friend definitely thinks so. And in my brain, at once her surfaces schedule 3 days and 3. Long or short, it looks like she has someone. And that someone is connected to her at this exact time. 3 days and 3, from 9 in the morning until 8 at night. What to do? I called the next day at my wife's to talk. But no, she stayed in the position she was in. We'll take a break from each other, but we'll decide sometime later too. Yeah, sure. But anyway, there's nothing to do. I take my friend's car and drive right up to the driveway at 8 in the morning, so I can actually see where she's going and when. She gets out in the morning, jumps in a cab, and goes to this job of hers. I walk her there, driving to mine. Then in the evening, I decide to go to her place again, and see who will give her a ride home from work tonight. Well, if she got a ride. But the situation repeats itself again. I can't follow my wife around indefinitely. I am also at work. In fact, there is no evidence. I have no guarantees that this is not nothing, and I do not do nonsense. In short, again, we are sitting at the cottage with a friend. And it has been almost a month. I come to our house and see my son. But Elizabeth doesn't say yes or no. I wouldn't want to talk about it now. Let's get through these days. And then we'll see what and where it takes us. Okay, imagine what I have to do. I mean, there's no reason to get divorced. But it's not a life together under these conditions either. But fortunately, this epic is still over. This same friend calls me and asks the address of the salon where his wife works. Listen, he said, it's all so cool and big. Where is it located? I need to buy a gift certificate. And while I'm there, maybe out of your tears, I'll talk to you. I gave him that address, the phone number. He called me back 2 hours later and told me his wife wasn't there. 2 counselors are there and no one from the bosses. But it's probably not her shift. I tell him, but my heart is restless. I take the car and go to the house. I come home and there is no one at home. Where is she then? I call her, she doesn't answer. I call her parents and she's not there either. The time had already come for the evening. I get in the car, go to her work, drove up, stood far away, waited. 8 p.m. comes up. I see Lisa coming out of the salon. And there's a guy next to her looking maybe 20 or 25. They go to his bad weather expensive and honest stamp. And in fact, they get in. I will not describe my emotions. They were contradictory. Well, on the one hand, at least I knew that my suspicions were not groundless. Well, on the other hand, I wanted to go out and ask questions directly. But luckily, I held back at the time. As it turned out, rightly so. I'm sitting here wondering where, in fact, they're going. They drove home. He dropped her off in front of our driveway and left. I immediately picked her up, parked my car right there and went straight up to our house. Opened the door with my key. She was already on her phone with someone. I took the cell phone out of her hand. And while it was unlocked, I went to her message. For this month, while she's been out here, let's say walking around. Apparently, my return wasn't really expected. So all the messages with this young, handsome guy, she did not delete at all. Anyway, I read everything in there. It turns out that in this main office, there is a management office. And this boy is actually, well, he's the son of one of the executives of this network. That's actually why you don't see him going up to her house. They had an office right at work for that. Now I see. That's actually why my friend today, when he came to the jewelry store, he didn't find Lisa at her workplace. The work must have been done in the office. Anyway, I didn't see any tears or sobs that night. She didn't really deny it. On the contrary, she finally told me all the things they'd been thinking about me for the past 2 years. Of course, they remembered that kissed on February 23rd, adding that that was just the tip of the iceberg. And supposedly, there's a bunch more betrayals behind me that she's sure she won't remember and figure out. That's it. Like I said, the whole situation is ambiguous. Somebody could say, it's your own fault. It was you on February 23rd kissed that lady. But I don't think that's a big deal. And it's a damn good excuse. And it's not a good excuse on February 23rd. He always thought his wife was just going to beauty salon treatments to keep her skin in shape. But when he happened to notice intimate treatments being performed right outside their apartment windows. But what he found out made him lose his head and raise a ruckus that all the neighbors in their building remembered. I want to tell you a truly detective story, witnesses and even participants, which happened to be myself. Saturday evening, I received a phone call from a friend of mine. Where are you? What are you? How are you? Let's see you. We can even talk at my house. Or better yet, let's meet at the store first. I think that without the store, we will not make it here. All right. I got ready, got in a cab and went to my friend's place. Anyway, after a short conversation, it turned out that he and his wife had had another fight. For the 10th or 20th time this month, I asked him approximately yes. And where is she now? I don't know. Turns out they've been having it for a month now. And each time, in order not to make the situation worse, Andrew goes to his office so that he and his wife alone would blow off steam, cool off. And he goes back to their house the next day or every other day. And little by little, everything kind of calms down. But after a while, it's all over again. He leaves the house again. Of course, they disconnect their phones from each other at these moments. And this has been going on for about 5 weeks now. And then it coincided with the weekend. So what do I tell him? And that I did not really want to ruin the weekend today, says Andre. But no matter how hard I tried, we still had a fight. I kind of left again. But then I decided to talk right away and make things work out. Call her. Her phone is off. Came home a couple of hours later. She's not home. Get it? Yeah. So we sat down with him for a while, finished what we brought from the store. It's outside. But for a second, it's almost 4 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting there feeling that we were starting to sober up a little bit. We had a last drink of tea. And I said I was going home. Otherwise, yours will come. And we are sitting in this kind of well condition. Moreover, that you have already quarreled, not very much it will look from the outside. Although to return to her husband only in the morning is also not very from the outside. Okay, that's it. Let's go. We said goodbye. I threw on my jacket and went downstairs. Standing near their doorway. It's a little cold. It's early spring. I got out on purpose and didn't call a cab. I thought I would take a walk, get some air, have a smoke, but then I would go. I looked and there was no lighter in my pocket. I searched all my pockets, and there was definitely no lighter. It seems to be on Andre's balcony. And those back to his third floor. The last thing I wanted now. Moreover, I look out the window. The light at Andrew is not lit. Probably asleep. Okay. And I see in their yard in front of Andrew's new house. There is a car with the lights on and parked in the so-called second row. But it means kind of came recently. And for sure there is someone inside. I come up in the back. I see the front window as ajar. I said, buddy, they're gonna be lighters. He reached for the ceiling light in the car and turned on the interior light. I'm standing outside in the dark and can't see me. I can see the cabin with the lights on pretty well. No one in the passenger seat. It's pushed all the way forward. I hear a lady's voice coming from the back seat. She said to my date. Okay, y gotta go. I'll call you. And she kissed the driver on the cheek. I leaned over to look and the lady had already opened kind of the back door, but also kind of on her way out. I looked closer. It's Marinka. I think it's Andrea. I immediately turned my back to them. I hear her get out of the car, slam the back door. Well, and goes to his entrance home. That's right. The driver couldn't find a lighter, started the car and told me that yes, now the cigarette lighter. I was sobered up by such surprises from Marinka. And I thought that I should make friends with this friend. I wonder if it's a brother or some colleague at work. And now I'll take Andrew. Although why would she then was a colleague to kiss something? Okay. I hear it. And his car chain noise. Well, when he started the car, I could hear it under the hood. And I said to him, that's the chain. They have a problem area. Yes, we allegedly when we worked in the service in the non-existent, when we came often on these, the owners often thought that the matter was moving towards a full-blown engine overhaul, but it turned out not. He tells me yes. And I was getting kind of wary too. So back and forth, we talked a little bit. I said, that's it. I should go home. It's time. Which way are you going now? He told me the direction. I told him I was going that way too. Let's go. Let's go. Do you mind if I sit in the back? They're going to stop the smell of alcohol and all that. Okay. I get in the back. I see the front passenger seat is definitely in an unnatural position for him. It's too far forward. Anyway, we're driving along. We're talking. I'm telling him about his date. Pretty girl, you know, got a girlfriend. He says she's got a lot of things. Are we laughing? Okay. I run my left hand over the back seat. And I feel like there's nothing there. I look and we're pretty far gone. I think it's time for me to get out too. Okay. There's a junction coming up. I tell him. And after the stop, I came all turned on my phone flashlight. I look in on the floor directly behind the driver's seat is a hairbrush. Obviously not a man's, but I think let it be evidence. If everything is confirmed and if it doesn't, I'll call and I'll give it back. We exchanged phone numbers with the driver. He said if there was a problem with the engine, he could call. I went out and called my friend to whom the wife returned in the morning. Andrew did not pick up the phone. I took a cab back to the house. The next day, Andrew called back himself, but there was no sensation. I told him about how last night I had fun investigating the alleged cheating and that I even have proof of a sort, but it turned out that Marinka herself took and told him I got home at about 5 o'clock in the morning. Andrew could there in an unsuitable state for such a conversation. In short, as a result, they and his friends, all what they think and everything as it is said, that's pretty much it. The only really unpleasant thing about this story is that there is no consistency. First, they should have broken up and then they should have thrown their comms, walking around at least until morning. If you like this story, don't forget to rate it and give it a like. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, I've got an absolutely jaw-dropping story for you. I'm not telling my story to be pitied. After all, everything that happened is my life, and I certainly don't need pity. I am a one-woman man in my life. I've always taken marriage very seriously, maybe even too seriously. I never walked away from my wife because I never saw anyone around except my only wife. And there was no need for it, no desire for it either. Although I must admit that many women tried, but she gave me, and now about everything in order. I met my future wife in the early 90s, among the guests at a wedding of a friend of mine and fell in love with her immediately. We dated her for 6 months and then decided to get married. We had a modest wedding and were over the moon. Our marriage was her second. She had developed a relationship with her ex-husband a year before we met. Something didn't work out there. I did not go to her with questions because I thought that there was no reason to stir up her soul, and she almost never said anything. By the way, my wife is a beautiful, smart woman and a great hostess. I was really lucky. When we got married, the whole country was in shambles. There were no normal, stable jobs. She was a medic and worked in a military unit, and I, apart from my main job, managed to work in 2 other places. It seemed to come out not bad. I wanted very much that the family had no need. From the first day I met my wife, I was very touchy about her. He loved her, but madly. In the truest sense of the word, he carried her in his arms. I considered her the closest and dearest person to me. 2 years of our life together had passed, but it didn't work out with children. It hurt her very much. She was very upset. She prophesied to me that I would leave her because of her own infertility. She was diagnosed with fallopian tubes. It was a terrible blow to her. But I did not despair. I was there for her, supported her, calmed her down. I told her she was my destiny and that I loved her more than life. I reassured her that I could do everything necessary to make her successful as a mother. After all, medicine can do a lot these days. She believed me, smiled at me, and for the sake of her smile, I was ready to give myself. Just to make her happy. At the time, I was working very hard. I had a goal. I worked hard to reach it. I constantly needed money for various examinations by different doctors, consultations at institutes to buy medicines. We went and had several surgeries in different clinics, all sorts of witch doctors there and everything. Each time I believed that this time everything would happen and my wife would finally get pregnant. And then we would have a real life. But in spite of our efforts, nothing worked. It took almost 5 years. My wife lost all hope and put up with it. But me, I have always been an optimist and never gave up. I continued to believe in a miracle. My energy gave my wife strength. She always told me that it was easy for her to be with me. I could look forward to tomorrow with confidence and courage. I believed her. Because I thought she was the person I was born to be with. And I must live my life for her. She is my strong backbone and my unbreakable bastion. If she is there, then I will overcome everything and be able to do anything. One day my wife and I read an article about the Human Reproduction Institute and the possibility of artificial insemination. This idea gave us new hope, new impetus and strength to strive for our cherished goal. I was ready to turn the earth upside down and was more confident than ever that this time everything would work out for sure. The surgery itself and the rehabilitation period was, by my standards at the time, well, very expensive. So I began to look for a way to earn the required amount. The city we have a small and special choice was not, but I once came across an ad in one of the magazines and it sounded as follows. Reserve soldiers, we invite you to serve under contract, decent wages and so on. In general, they were recruiting tools to do certain kinds of work in certain places and paid very good money for the work. I did my compulsory military service in the Marines and God bless me. Of course, I was not particularly raving about patriotic ideas, so I wasn't burning with a desire to lay down my life for somebody's political interests either. I just needed tools and resources to achieve our goal. In general, I thought about it and decided to take a risk. My wife cried and did not want to let me go. She was afraid and said that if something happened to me, she would not need the money later. And I was explaining that, unfortunately, we were not born into millionaire families and no one will ever give us anything for nothing in this life, unless you come and take it yourself. I calmed her down, told her that everything would be all right, because we need this money not for trinkets, but for a good cause. In general, I traveled to faraway places, wasn't home for a long time, but came back with what was needed. I was lucky, and I did not lay my head down, nor did I take sins on my soul. And then my wife and I went to the institute, had an operation, and oh miracle, it happened, which we were so alone. My wife got pregnant, I rejoiced. Soon our daughter was born, we were happy, just madly. I was literally flying on wings, working and doing almost everything around the house, helping not with the baby, because it was my pleasure, and I did not notice any worries at all. My wife said that I was an eternal engine, and I really wanted to surround her and my daughter with every kind of care. And soon I got a good and decent stable job and started earning good money. I bought a car for my wife, we moved to a bigger apartment, and every year we traveled to the seas and oceans. We spent all our free time together, tried to make up our leisure time, trips to the countryside, to the movies, skiing, skating rink, etc., so my girls wouldn't get bored. Thinking back to those days, it seemed to me here was a candy truck rolling over on our street, and we deserved it. That's how 14 years of our life together passed, and how happy I thought it would be. My daughter was slowly growing up, family always came first for me, everything was just for my loved ones. I never felt that my life is ordinary, that it is monotonous, scandal in the family has never been. I respect for my wife avoided even a reason for her discontent, and if something she did not like the little things, went first to a compromise. I always tried to pay attention to her as a woman, I do not remember a day when I did not tell her how much I loved her, and how much I valued her. When we were poor, I always found an opportunity to make her pleasant surprises, with or without cause. Flowers, small gifts, and various girlish trinkets, she always liked it so much. In bed with my spouse, everything was fine too. I am not conservative, and it seemed to me that we are absolutely open, that we trust each other. I tried to be sensitive to all my wife's interest, and in my opinion, everything was very harmonious. And she herself always said that she was happy with everything, and that I fully satisfy her needs. And now a word about jealousy. I can say that I have never been jealous of her. She never gave me any reason to be, even though she worked as a medic in an almost male-dominated team, a military unit. In my work, I periodically went on long business trips, for a week and a half, or even 2 weeks. I always looked forward to returning home to my beloved. She too, always met me with joy and awe. And then? Then everything was like in the movies or anecdotes. One day I was flying on business on another expedition, and in the city where I had to change flights. I received a message from my colleagues that my work was cancelled, and I had to return home. I flew back to my city in the afternoon, bought a small bouquet of roses and champagne, and decided to surprise my wife without telling her. By my count, she was still at work, and my daughter at school. I took a cab home, started to open the door with the key. But the door was locked from the inside. I thought, well, there's no surprise. Started ringing the doorbell, zero emotion. Knocked and rang, began to worry, not understanding what was happening. I even wanted to call the police, but finally my wife's voice asked me from the door. Who's there? I said, honey, why are you scaring me? It's me, I cancelled a business trip. Even then I thought she was asleep or maybe sick. And then she opened the door, and I did not recognize her, and it was a completely different person. Her eyes were alien, she looked as if I was not there, as if through me. I went into the hallway, and through the open door into the hall, I saw some military officer sitting in an armchair. Only then did I notice that my wife was wearing a naked robe, and suddenly I realized everything. She told me in a calm tone, you're bleeding. I saw that the stinging bouquet was growing with such force that I literally squeezed it through my fingers. For the first time in my life, my legs trembled so much. So much so that I just sat down at the door on the floor. It's hard for me to describe in words how I felt at that moment. I couldn't breathe, I was suffocating. There was a tornado of thought in my head and everything. It was like a dream. I couldn't believe my eyes, it didn't seem like it was happening to me, because it just couldn't happen to me at all. My wife is not capable of that. Then she said, we need to talk. I hope you're not going to make a scandal, he's not guilty of anything. But me, I couldn't even stand up at that minute, let alone scandalize. If I'd had a fit of rage, I probably would have done something irreparable. But now I realize, thank God, that I didn't. I didn't see him disappear from the apartment unnoticed. My wife and I stayed behind. She sat down on her knees in front of me and said, this happens in life. And she cried. I'd remember bits and pieces of what she told me. I can't live like this anymore. I am confused. I want to repent to you. You are good. I am bad. You are unworthy. Then she began to tell me how many times in her whole life she had cheated on me. I had thoughts that she wanted to destroy me. She went on. She told me that the very first time was with her ex-husband. In the beginning of our relationship, when she and I first started dating. She said she met her ex intentionally and gave herself to him to prove to him what kind of woman he had lost. Then she cheated on me with some military medic in another city when I did a refresher course. She gave herself to him out of pity. He was very romantic and was suffering. Suffering because he had recently divorced his wife. Read the elements to her. Then there was another military doctor, but already in our town. Then another and finally came to the last one with whom I actually caught them our house. She told me that they had been having an affair for almost a month and that she had wanted to break up with him. But she hadn't had time. She said they always met at work and that she was nasty because she desecrated our house and so on. When I listened to her, I asked, why did you do this to me? She sobbed straight into a screen and said she couldn't explain to me the reasons for her actions. It is an inexplicable passion and there is no excuse for it and it is up to me to make the decision. At the same time, she swore that if I could find the strength to forgive her, she would be faithful to me to the grave. For the first few days, I couldn't sleep or eat at all. Like a robot, I went to work, came home, just lay there and stared at the ceiling. At night, I was drenched in cold sweat, drinking water and smoking non-stop. I did not touch alcohol, by the way. My colleagues asked me what happened. They said I was all black. My wife saw what was happening to me and constantly cried and begged for forgiveness. I didn't know what to say to her, so I kept quiet. I didn't know where to go or where to fail. My head wasn't working at all. Later, I was going to talk to her many times, to share my soul with her as I always had before. To tell her how much I loved her, but I couldn't find the right words. There was a lump in my throat that I couldn't help but spit out and swallow. 6 months went by like that. During that time, I kept thinking and remembering our life. Dating inside myself, looking for answers. Maybe it was me. I was doing something wrong. I chewed myself out of the whole guilt complex at the time. During that time, I had given up on my wife both emotionally and physically. The thought of sexual intimacy with her never even occurred to me. I became afraid of having sex with her. I don't know how to explain it. It seemed to me that I was not able to satisfy her. That's why there was no reason to go to bed. It would only embarrass me. We communicated with her on domestic topics. To my daughter, I allocated attention without prejudice as before. Most of all, I wanted my daughter not to suspect anything. At that time, she was at the beginning of her teenage years and I didn't want to hurt her because she had nothing to do with the circumstances. Then later, the emotions went away and the pain in my soul somewhat subsided. One day, I decided to talk to my wife and told her that I did not hold a grudge against her. That I loved her just as much. I told her that what happened probably changed something in me. But so far, I can't figure out what it is. I guess it takes time. I asked my wife to promise me that if life with me didn't turn out the way she wanted it to, that she would tell me right away. I won't hold back. There was no time to waste. Life is one and things can still work out differently and with another person. We became close again, but not the way we were. I tried to be the same as before, but in bed with his wife began incomprehensible problems with potency. It made me gnaw on myself even more. So another 6 years went by and the family was always in the first place for me. And the question of whether it was cheating on me or not, I stopped wondering. She was just as beautiful, smart, a great hostess, and a good mom. Yes, I forgave her, but something didn't break you. Everything in the soul came out. Empty. This poisoned me to the bone. My unbreakable bastion collapsed like a house of cards. And somehow the feeling of new did not. In time, I became a different person. The true meaning of the word treason is that everything has changed. I had changed. I remembered with a smile the days when I wandered far and wide, earning money to give birth to my daughter. Back then, I had the phrase written on my backpack unloading. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. After a while, I suddenly stopped feeling the inner weight that had been weighing me down for so long. It's all strange. Really strange. I tried to comprehend and understand what had kept me from changing my life before. I don't know. I had always been an optimist and believed in the best. I hoped that things would settle down and be okay. And it did settle down, but at the same time, something very important left my soul. The very thing that gave meaning to the existence of our marriage. The very thing that motivated me to keep going. My stupid responsibility dictated that I couldn't drop everything and just walk out, because that would be a betrayal. But it was, no, not a betrayal. Just like that, suddenly and all of a sudden my attitude toward everything that had happened was different. I suddenly felt that my inner changes in my head had come to an end. It was as if I had woken up from oblivion. I realized that for a long time, I had not been living my life at all. A complete stranger to me. My wife, who was sleeping beside me, I looked at her sleeping, at her face. I realized I didn't know this woman anymore. I left home that morning, turned off my phone, drove around town, stood on the roadsides in the woods. It's hard to explain, but somehow I felt at ease. I felt like a bird out of its cage. It felt like I had paid for all my mistakes in full. I thought and remembered and became more and more aware of my freedom. In the evening, I returned home, where I informed my wife of everything. There was a long talk, but no recriminations. She cried and said she had been waiting for this day all the time. Strangely enough, I no longer felt pity for her. I correctly explained to her my understanding of life at that moment, and she told me hers. She asked for forgiveness over and over again, and I told her that I had forgiven her long ago, but that I was no longer the man she had married. We lived almost 23 years. All 15 years until the breaking point, I lived only for her and my daughter. In the next 8 years, I don't even remember. In all that time, I never once reproached her for anything. I lived through everything, but during that time, a lot has changed, especially my understanding and attitude towards everything. I realized that further marriage with her was a waste of time. My daughter grew up and almost jumped out of the family nest. The wife came to terms with it. I think she realized that our paths had parted long ago, and we just went side by inertia. But to be objective, there were good things in our life. While I was in the dark, nothing existed for me. I was happy. We finalized the divorce. I explained everything to my daughter. She is old enough now and understood everything. We continue to see her much more often than we see our wife. Life goes on, and the emptiness that echoed in my soul for so long, it no longer rings. There is no permanent woman. I'm afraid, and I don't want one. Now I know for sure that what doesn't kill us all at once, it makes us invalids. Dear friends, our next audio story has come to an end. Frankly speaking, I like this story, and in 2 words, I will tell you why. First, I was expecting at most 1 or 2 betrayals from my wife, but as I read this list, it made me, how can I tell you, feel the greatest pity for her. And even for a second, I felt like I was in the main character's shoes. God forbid, I even remember having that same emotion come over me during the recording. I hope nothing was audible, but that's for you to judge. The story of the main character's life itself. In the process of reading the text, it made me deeply disgusted. After all, is it normal? You fell in love with a woman and did not even ask about her past, especially since she was married. Naively believing, risking your life for the sake of happiness, the questionable happiness of your couple. Overall, the way he behaved cannot be called worthy of a man, I believe. Plus, there is one inconsistency. Look, he risked his life in hot spots, and when he sought his lover in his, I emphasize, in his house, the poor guy was dumbfounded and crouched on the carpet, that he didn't even see the lover leave the apartment. And in general, what do you think? Is it okay to then live 8 years together and feel like nothing because of day-to-day? Of course, what pleased me, if you can say so at all, was the ending. He somehow found the strength to leave his wife. But does that count as courage? That's a ridiculous question. What do you think of his behavior? Do you think you could have noticed before that his wife was like a March cat on every corner, making horns? You could take it and drink it. And by tradition, if you liked the video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to comment. I always answer you in the comments. And also listen to your suggestions, and in general, your activity makes me not to stop and record stories every day. Well, hey everyone, welcome back. Today, I've got an absolutely jaw-dropping story for you. The sound of the alarm clock cut through the morning silence with its annoying sharp beeping. Cliff opened his eyes, trying to suppress an irritated groan. It seemed like he had just touched the pillow half an hour ago, but the clock already showed 7 a.m. What a mystery. Lately, as a decent young parent, he hadn't been getting enough sleep. Nights were dedicated to his 6-month-old child, Oliver. He and his wife were constantly jumping up at the sound of the calling cry from the crib, reminiscent of a siren's wail. But now the apartment was quiet. The child and his wife were still sleeping. Cliff carefully kissed Kendall on the forehead and then got out of the warm blanket. Unable to rest, he tiptoed to the crib, first thing, and looked inside. The tiny boy was snoring, his fist nestled under his chubby cheek. Cliff couldn't help but smile. The child was long awaited in their family. The man couldn't be happier about becoming a father, and when people told him that the boy was his spitting image, he would dissolve into a satisfied smile. Such things as children's whims, sleepless nights, or dirty diapers seemed like nothing to him. He worked hard, but tried to help his wife with these responsibilities. The man enjoyed playing with his son, bathing him, and pushing the stroller for hours along the streets on weekends, just to make sure his son slept in the fresh air. The workday on Monday didn't go well for Cliff, who worked in the field of water purification. There were problems with the delivery of materials, which meant that work at enterprises had to be suspended. Naturally, clients were dissatisfied, and it was up to Cliff to speak with them. By the end of the day, the man dreamed of returning home and hugging his son as soon as possible. But sad surprises in his life were just beginning. When he was stuck in evening traffic on his way home, his wife called on his smartphone. "Hi, Kendall," answered the husband, trying to hold the phone and make a turn at the same time. "Will you come home soon?" his wife asked, her nervousness evident in her voice. The man frowned. What if something had happened to their son? "The city is jam-packed, but I'll be there in 40 minutes for sure," he promised. Did something happen? No, she hurried to reassure her husband. "Everything is fine. Don't hurry." After that, Kendall hung up. The conversation seemed strange to Cliff. Despite his wife's request not to hurry, he hastened home. To his great surprise, he didn't find his wife at home. Their son was sleeping in the crib, but his mother wasn't there. Deciding that she might have gone down to the neighbor, he went to the kitchen to have dinner. But instead of dinner, a note attached to one of the magnets on the refrigerator was waiting for him. His wife wrote, rushing. The text was barely legible, and it took him several attempts to understand its essence. He simply couldn't believe his eyes. "Forgive me, Cliff. I can't stay with you and our son. Circumstances have arisen. Tell our son that I love him." Of course, the man thought it was a prank. He started calling Kendall, and then her acquaintances, but to no avail. She disappeared. Thus began the new life of Cliff and his son, Oliver. Raising a child was difficult, and it was not getting any easier with time. Although numerous blogs that he scoured, searching for answers to his questions, asserted that it was about to get a little easier. When the baby starts to eat, you will be easier. When the baby takes his first steps, you'll be easier. When he goes to school, you'll be easier. Now Cliff could answer all such statements categorically. No, there was nothing easy about parenting. Each year brought its own difficulties. At first, the man had to work with the child in his arms, while delving into issues of infant feeding. The child sometimes got sick, things got confused, and Cliff's head spun. Then he made a daily schedule of tasks, and in a few months, learned to handle the responsibilities skillfully. During this time, Kendall had only sent one message, the divorce papers. But she refused custody. Without feeling any pity, Cliff signed the necessary papers and forgot about the woman forever. When Oliver became a schoolboy, his father had to not only deal with the crisis of adulthood, but also attended parent-teacher meetings. He felt like a black sheep among the army of mums. However, all these difficulties did not prevent the father and son from living a happy life. Cliff raised a kind and responsive boy who could stand up for himself and for the weaker ones. Oliver went to karate and swimming from the age of 4. He was healthy and a real source of pride for Cliff. The fact that Kendall once existed in their lives was forgotten. Even Oliver, having asked a couple of questions about his mother in childhood, also stopped thinking about her. Only Kendall herself reminded them of her existence when Oliver turned 18. Oliver was supposed to celebrate with friends at a country house on the weekend. They had rented it. On Tuesday, on his birthday, he and his father gathered for a family dinner, which they planned to finish with a festive cake. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. The men glanced at each other. "Are you expecting guests?" Cliff smiled. "Well, actually, no. Everyone already congratulated me. Maybe Ruby?" Oliver responded and went to open the door. There was a woman he didn't know on the doorstep. The birthday boy looked at the guest in surprise. "Hello," he said politely. "Oliver, dear," the woman immediately said, and her voice trembled. "Oliver, my boy, how you've grown." She rushed to the astonished Oliver, hugging him tightly. The young man was stunned, stepped back, not understanding what was happening. Cliff saw the scene as he came out of the kitchen. "Kendall." He squeezed out sharply. "What the hell are you doing here?" After half an hour of tears and lamentations from Kendall, the trio sat down in the kitchen. The birthday cake was untouched in the center of the table. "A year ago, I became a widow," Kendall began. "My husband was fabulously rich, and he left me everything, including his construction company. But it's hard to run the company alone. I need an assistant." "Why do you need us?" asked Cliff, nervously drumming his fingers on the table. "You see, I can't trust anyone," explained Kendall. Everyone in the company dreams of taking my place, and I decided that I can bring in my own son, and then all the inheritance will go to Oliver. I have no children or heirs, only you, Oliver. We could leave here for the capital, where you will have many prospects." The woman looked hopefully at her son, while Oliver looked hesitantly at his father, noticing how the man's face turned red and then covered with white spots. "You know what, Kendall? Get out of here and go back where you came from," Cliff growled, barely containing his rage. "I raised my boy for 18 years, and now you come and say that it will be better for him with you? You're insane. Do you even know that he has his own life? He just got into university. He has a girlfriend with whom they have serious relationships. Although, how would you know?" Seeing his father's condition, Oliver tried to calm him down by putting his hand on his shoulder. Then he shyly looked at his mother. "I'm sorry, but Dad is right. I don't even know you." He shook his head. "I have other plans for my life, and I won't abandon Dad, just as he didn't abandon me. Unlike you." Kendall tried to convince her son, but he was adamant. Eventually, she left with nothing. However, 2 weeks later, when Cliff returned home, he had a strong sense of déjà vu. The apartment was empty, there was dead silence, and there was a note on the fridge. "Dad, this is my chance, and I can't miss it. I have no warm feelings for my mother, but I feel that I can achieve more in the city. As soon as I'm on my feet, I'll come back, and I'll be able to help you. You won't need anything. I'm sorry I'm running away like this, but you wouldn't understand me, and wouldn't let me go. Don't look for me, but know that I love you." The man took a step towards the stool to collapse on it, as his legs weakened. He held the note in his trembling hand, feeling the pain spreading in his chest. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Deciding that it was Oliver, who had come to his senses, Cliff rushed to open the door, despite the growing fire in his chest. But on the threshold was Ruby, Oliver's girlfriend. "Hello?" The blonde smiled briefly. "Is Oliver home?" "His phone isn't answering." The man found no strength to explain anything. He silently handed the crushed note to the girl, and then a particularly sharp pain pierced his heart, and groaning, Cliff grabbed his chest. "Oh my God, what's wrong with you? Are you okay?" Ruby rushed to the man who collapsed on the floor, but he could no longer answer. The girl immediately called an ambulance, but they couldn't save the man. It seemed that his heart simply couldn't withstand the second betrayal. Ruby buried him very modestly. Unable to find any other solution, she took some money from the deceased's apartment to pay for the burial, because she had no savings of her own. She hoped that Oliver would come to his father's funeral, but he never showed up. 7 years passed since Oliver's escape and Cliff's funeral. As promised, Oliver not only got back on his feet, but also achieved unprecedented success. He returned to his father as a winner and dreamed of telling him about it. Moreover, he hoped to take his dad with him, show him the capital in a different life. But the apartment greeted him with silence and dust, as if no one had lived there for a very long time. Dumbfounded, Oliver decided to visit his ex-girlfriend, who lived in the next entrance. Ruby opened the door immediately, and Oliver realized that she had not changed at all. Beautiful, with short light hair and naive blue eyes. "Hi," he smiled, feeling awkward. "Oliver." The girl's eyes widened. "But where did you come from? May I come in?" he asked, nodding towards the apartment. Ruby nodded, stepping aside and allowing her ex-boyfriend to enter the house. She lived there alone. Her grandmother, who raised the girl, died in a car accident 5 years ago. The girl had not yet gotten married and worked at the local library. However, the girl was reluctant to share the details of her personal life, as if she was not telling me something. "Did you come to visit your father's grave?" Ruby asked, pouring tea for the man. "What?" Oliver was baffled. "What grave?" Ruby looked at him in surprise, but then sadness appeared in her eyes. "Don't you know anything, Oliver? I buried your dad. 7 years ago, right after you disappeared, he had a heart attack." That evening, they went to the cemetery, where his son, kneeling at his father's grave, begged for forgiveness. But it was too late. Oliver decided to stay in his hometown for a while. He increasingly visited his ex-girlfriend. Sometimes he would stop by her workplace, saying he was passing by, or invite her for a walk or dinner together. Thus, the odd relationship revived, as if a withered plant were generously watered and the sun warmed it up, allowing it to bloom. The young people began to prepare for the wedding. "We have to visit your father's grave before the wedding," Ruby said when the young people were working on the guest list. So a couple of days later, Ruby and Oliver came to the cemetery to share the happy news with his father. When the young people approached the grave and the girls sat down to lay flowers, a little boy appeared next to them. It was already evening, and Ruby even shuddered when the pale boy, like a ghost, emerged from the mist, asking, "I am sorry, do you have any spare change?" "I'm hungry." The boy was a typical representative of the local beggars, thin, dirty, and sometimes wearing torn clothes. The cemetery was full of such characters, and the guard often chased away those who tried to collect candy or anything else from the graves. Oliver and Ruby exchanged glances, and the man searched his pockets for cash, eventually handing the child a couple of bills. "Aren't you afraid to wander here, boy?" asked Ruby, looking at the child with pain in her heart. He seemed to be around 6 years old. "I'm scared," the child honestly admitted, scratching his head and hiding the money in his pocket. "I wouldn't have come here, but getting a berating from my grandma is even scarier." Maybe the dead won't come out of the graves, but grandma will definitely beat me if I don't bring money, and the people in the cemetery are kind, unlike in town. They're sad here, that's why they give money, but in the city they chase me, they even hit me sometimes. So, you're beaten at home? Does your grandmother make you beg? Ruby asked, feeling increasingly worried. Yes, the boy nodded, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Where does your grandmother live? Oh, there in the village, the boy waved his hand. Ruby gasped. It was a half-hour drive to the village, and the boy had to walk even longer. It was getting darker and cooler outside. Oliver, let's at least give him a ride home, Ruby asked her fiancé. He nodded, agreeing with her. They got the boy, who introduced himself as Louis, in the car and drove him home. Oliver lived in an old wooden house, and as soon as they parked next to the gate, an angry old woman came out of it. Despite her advanced age, she moved quickly and strongly. The old woman immediately started shouting at the little boy, scolding him for something, and not hesitating to use foul language. Then she even slapped him hard. What are you doing, woman? Oliver barked, approaching her. Meanwhile, Ruby ran up to the child, who just flinched and didn't even cry, because he was used to such treatment. What's your business here? Why are you interfering where you're not wanted? The old woman screeched. Who are you, anyway? She looked at Oliver and Ruby, and then suddenly fell silent. Her eyes narrowed and she asked, and you, girl, are you Lisa Hamilton's granddaughter? Answer. Yes, Ruby nodded fearfully, but my grandmother died 5 years ago. Oh, you wretch. Take your freak away. Look at you. You and your grandmother sent that brat to me, and now you've come to teach me upbringing. You should have taken care of yourself, cuckoo. You gave birth, but you refused to raise a child, right? Ruby listened in complete shock as the old woman's curses poured out of her mouth. Wait a minute, Oliver interrupted. We don't understand you. Can you explain what's going on? And she did. It turned out that when he ran away with his mother, Ruby found out she was pregnant, but she didn't get a chance to tell him since he disappeared. On the day she came to share the news, Oliver's father died. The girl buried him, but didn't know what to do next. Her grandmother urged her to terminate it, but Ruby couldn't get rid of her unborn child. She gave birth to a boy on time, but the baby turned out to be dead. At least that's what the doctors told Ruby. In reality, her grandmother paid someone to keep quiet and deceived her. Lisa Hamilton believed that they would not be able to raise the child and that her granddaughter would ruin her life. She sent her granddaughter to study in another city and the child lived with a cleaning worker. Meanwhile, the elderly woman wanted to send him to an orphanage eventually, but she didn't have time to settle things before she got hit by a car and died. Meanwhile, the cleaner took pity on the child and decided to keep him, but with time she realized it had been a mistake. She was laid off from work, but had to feed and clothe the child. It was difficult to raise him. There was not enough money and her health was failing. She became increasingly angry with the boy each day, considering him a burden. But she couldn't give him away, fearing that she would be prosecuted for that. It would have been difficult to believe her story if Oliver and Ruby did not take a new look at the boy. He turned out to be insanely similar to his parents. That evening, they took Louis to their home. He was suspicious of adults, but he was happy to leave the old woman he used to consider as his grandmother. Ruby hoped that over time the boy would thaw and she could compensate him with love for all the years that they had been apart. Tears streamed down Ruby's face and her heart ached with pity for this child. Perhaps your father brought him to us, Ruby mused, when the boy dressed in his new pajamas slept in their bed. Oliver remained silent, though he himself thought the same thing. Maybe his father could forgive him after all and give him the best wedding present ever. 5 years have passed since then. The family's apartment was noisy as usual. Louis teased his 4-year-old sister and threw a pillow at her older brother's laughter. Children, are you ready yet? Oliver asked, peeking into his son's room and shaking his head. Molly, don't strangle your brother. He still has a test to take today. Dad, why did you have to remind me? Groaned his son from under the pillow. Molly, squeeze harder. I don't want to go to school. But I want to go to school, the girl declared. You're thinking that way now, little piglet. The schoolboy snorted, emerging into the light of day. Oliver didn't notice his wife approaching as he watched the children. She hugged him around the waist, pressing close to her beloved. He smiled, kissing her on the head. Breakfast is on the table, Ruby said, looking lovingly at the mischievous children. Molly laughed again because Louis started tickling her. The laughter of children, the smell of coffee from the kitchen, the tender smile of his wife. Oliver thought this morning was the most beautiful of his life. But he was wrong. There were many, many more ahead. Stick around until the end to see how everything unfolded, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more intense stories. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. In today's story, OP found out his wife cheated on him after he caught his wife trying to sneak her affair partner into their house. He then confronted the affair partner and things escalated quickly. Little does the wife know that he has been recording and writing down everything she has been doing with her affair partner to set himself up for nice revenge when they go to court. Let's get into the story. She cheated, I'm figuring it out, and it hurts. Hello everyone, I, 34 male, found my wife, 33 female, in our bed with another man. A little background. For the sake of my sanity, I will refer to my wife as Ellie. My best friend's name is Omar, not real names. Ellie and I met in college and hit it off right away. When we started dating, I was not really assertive. You could accurately say that it was her showing interest and desire in me that made me really begin to value myself and work past a ton of insecurities I used to deal with. I was just a hardworking, nerdy, smart dude, but had never had any real luck with women. To me it was almost incredible that someone as smart and beautiful as her would show as much interest in me as I showed in her. We both have always been driven, which led us separately building small businesses of our own by the time we graduated college. We moved in together after graduation and a year later, married. We had, what I considered, a very strong marriage. We had weathered family tragedies, professional challenges, small and large disagreements, and always managed to work through everything, and I felt it always made us stronger. Ellie has always had a huge social circle that included a fair number of men, but I never thought too much about it, as she never did anything that raised flags, since all social outings seemed to always be as a large mixed group, and I came to trust her closest friends. As our 10-year anniversary was coming up, I decided to bring up the topic of starting a family. Early on in the relationship, we had together decided to compromise on the size of our family. I wanted kids, she wanted none or at most one, so we agreed on having one. Now, 10 years into our marriage, secure economically, and thinking how healthy I thought our relationship was, I brought the topic up. I can't help but think me doing this may have started this whole chain of events. A little over 3 months ago, she tells me she is going out with her friends to have some fun. She basically told me she needed to unwind, as she was getting stressed about me asking about having kids again. That night, she comes back at 4 a.m. Starting with that day, our bedroom goes completely dead. In our relationship, Ellie has always initiated as much as me, in fact on average I would say more often than me, and for rare periods when we were dealing with traveling, I can't think of us ever going more than 5 days without some form of intimacy. She starts going out more, guarding her phone, avoiding me, all this, stuff I had never seen from her before. After about 3 to 4 weeks of this, I talk to Omar, my best friend, and he points me to Reddit, and I start reading. Eventually, I decide I need to do something about this, as it's beginning to put me in a bad mood. I don't just want to trust her, I like to trust my wife, I need to trust her. Well, needless to say, I get my hands on her phone and check her calls and texts, feeling like a complete monster violating her privacy. Turns out that one of the people new to our social circle is an old high school flame from before we were together. The more I dug, the more I found. I think the fact I'd always trusted her completely made her complacent about hiding the affair better. I found out that during that party a month before, he had attended, and they spent all night catching up, and ended up kissing, not even really hiding it from her whole group of friends and then conveniently going to the bathroom at the same time. Up to this point, all I had felt has been this giant pit of anxiety in my stomach, a part of me trying to hold on to the image of the woman I thought I had married, a kind of self-delusion. But the anger and sadness start getting overwhelming, made worse by the fact that she seems oblivious to my sudden indifference. She didn't notice, I had stopped making romantic gestures, I felt like I was breaking inside. Finally, a month ago, I decided to catch them in the act and I tell Ellie I'm going to visit my cousin for the weekend. He lives 3 hours away, but instead I go stay with Omar who has been helping me record and copy everything. I waited and sure enough, she brought him to our house to our bed. I snuck in the house and made my way to our room and the sounds left no doubts. They were so into it, they didn't notice me standing there at the door recording them with my phone. I literally felt something in me break, like something in my soul snapped so hard I could hear it. My veins went ice cold and something like a 10-ton anvil had been dropped on my chest. I couldn't breathe, I went numb. The next part one can only tell you what Omar says happened because I only remember parts of the next few minutes. According to Omar, who I had brought as a witness, apparently I walked up to them, pulled that guy off of the bed and Omar pulled me off of him. I remember Omar holding me down on the ground. After that, there was the normal hysterics of being caught. I went no contact for 5 weeks and began working with a lawyer preparing for the worst. Omar served as her contact point during that time since I simply didn't want to talk to her. I only contacted my family and told them that we were having problems. After the 5 weeks of no contact, we met and talked. She was remorseful, told me it wasn't my fault that it was all her doing, her responsibility and her decisions. We decided to go to marriage counseling and at least explore if there is anything salvageable. Sitting here, I can't believe that even after that, I still love her. I'm disgusted with myself that I have thought about her well-being, about her happiness. I especially hate that now I have to question our entire relationship. Was it just now that she got brazen about cheating or has it happened before and I didn't bother looking far enough or was too stupidly trusting to see it at all? It's now been almost a month since deciding to try marriage counseling and my questions to those who have already gone through this are the following. 1. Is it possible to reconcile without feeling that you lose some self-respect? 2. How long does the anger to sadness to numbness, rinse and repeat cycle last? I'm getting exhausted at the constant emotional roller coaster. 3. I find myself really loathing the whole idea of having to essentially be on the constant lookout. Is that a sign of me wanting out or just me being exhausted because I honestly can't tell? I'll take any advice, honestly. I love her. I've been head over heels for her since we met back in college. I want to work it out. Is it actually possible? And if it is, will it ever resemble what it used to be even remotely? TLDR, wife cheated, trying to reconcile but have a lot of fears and questions. After reading everyone's replies and the messages, I took the weekend to let it all sink in and harden my resolve. I came to the conclusion that I was never going to be able to live with myself if I stayed with her. Staying and working on it would mean having to sacrifice a significant portion of my self-respect. I also realized that I want no part of a relationship that would require me to be in a state of constant vigilance for signs of betrayal. So I decided to push the proverbial red button and nuke it all. Here's how it all went down. Monday, I woke up early to an unexpected surprise. When I opened my eyes, my Johnson was greeting me at full attention. Guys, I can't stress how surprising that was to me, considering that since finding out about Ellie's affair, I had not had morning wood. It was like my body was saying, hell yeah, we are going to get this done today and be done, ready for something new. I actually laughed so hard at seeing it that Omar and his wife came to check in on me thinking I was having some sort of mental breakdown. I got up, got ready, and called Ellie's dad and told him we needed to talk. I met with him about an hour before our marriage counseling. The whole drive there I was surprised at how calm I was about it. I could still feel an ocean of emotion somewhere deep down, but on the surface, I was not feeling anything. We met up at a little mom and pop breakfast place near his house and we sat down. Ellie's dad is a good man, light-hearted and funny, but more importantly, he is level-headed. I thanked him for how he and his wife had treated me all these years and told him I was sorry to have this talk with him. He listened patiently, but as I started telling him why I was going to be divorcing his daughter, he lowered his head. I could tell he was ashamed and angry, not at me, but at Ellie. He told me he understood, and I asked him to not tell Ellie as I was going to be telling her within the hour. He agreed, we shook hands, and then he told me to take care. I hated having to shatter his image of her. I debated with myself if I should have asked him to care for her, but I shouted down that instinct because he is her dad. Of course he will care for her, but also it is no longer my business to care for her. She is a big girl. Next, I went to our scheduled marriage and counseling session. I had been rehearsing all day Sunday what I would say to her and how I would say it. I wanted to essentially emotion-proof my actions and words for the next few hours. I sat there in the parking lot for 10 minutes and just prayed. I hadn't felt like I wanted to or could since all this started. When we sat down for marriage counseling, Ellie was wearing one of the dresses I loved her in, and for a split second, I forgot everything, but then the visceral disgust and anger I felt pushed the attraction completely out. I let the counselor get things going like our previous sessions, and after about 10 minutes of her and Ellie talking, I interrupted. This is how it went. Excuse me, I have a few things I need to say to Ellie, and that I wanted to be able to say here with a neutral third party. If at any point I am interrupted, I will simply leave, and that's that. Ellie, I have come to realize I do not need to know if this was the only time you cheated. It doesn't matter. I do not need to know how long it went for. It doesn't matter. I do not need to know how many times you cheated. It doesn't matter. I do not need to know why. Even if there was a good reason, a perfectly why, it also would not matter. The only thing that matters is that you did. I know now the only facts that matter. You were never going to have children with me. At this, Ellie opens her mouth to interject, and I started walking to the door, so she immediately backed off. You were going to string me along for however it would take. You were going to cheat on me sooner or later. This is when the waterworks started to open up for her. You do not respect me or love me. The counselor begins to look like she is about to interject, and I respond by taking another step toward the door, which ends that. My lawyer is filing for divorce as we sit here, and as of about an hour ago, your father knows the entire truth of what has been going on. Do not contact me. From here on out, the only person we will communicate through our lawyers. These are the last words we will ever exchange. Goodbye. I walked the last few steps to the door and walked out. As soon as I closed the door, I heard a wail, the likes of which would haunt people's dreams. She scrambled out of the office pursuing me and tried to stop me, telling me how sorry she is and how we can start a family and to give her a second chance, and she cried hysterically throughout. I pushed past her and got in my car and left. At this point, that ocean of emotions that had been quietly hiding underneath it all started roiling, and I was barely holding it in. I drove to my parents' house and sent the text message I had planned to Ellie's best friend's husband. When I got home, my old man was at the store, but Mom could tell I wasn't well. She has always been able to read me like a book. I told her I needed to tell her and Dad something important, and we sat down and waited. At this point, I have to thank Responsible Mode 114 for messaging me, which added and he totally calmed me down. About 30 minutes later, Dad arrived. I poured it all out. The more I talked, the more I felt that ocean of emotions emptying and all that pain pouring out of me. When I finished talking to my dad, he just held me as I cried into his shirt for a solid 20 minutes. When it all ended, I felt spent and oddly at peace. I have arranged for Omar to receive a Harley he has been eyeing for a while. He has been more than a friend to me and I'm going to try my best to be as good a friend to him as he has been to me. I can't wait to see his face. I think this is the last time I will post as it should be the end of this story. I just want to thank you all. Would have never thought that I would find sound and sane advice from strangers on the internet. I know that it will be a long road ahead, that I will still need individual counseling to deal with the aftershocks of this debacle and rebuild my ability to trust. I have to hope that little by little, all this pain and sadness and anger will go away. Like Roto-Rooter for my soul if I do the work. Now begins the rest of my life and I can honestly say I am looking forward to it. Wow OP, the way you handled the situation was outstanding. Kudos to you. You dropped the bomb right in the middle of your counseling session with her, which is even more epic. The good thing is that now the worst days are behind you, and from here on out, it will get better. As you mentioned, your wife simply wanted her cake and to eat it too, which explains why she came crying and chasing after you like a lost puppy after you told her your intentions. Best of luck to you in the future OP. Let's see what the comments had to say about this situation. Armor Teague 227 said, "My dude, you handled yourself like a boss and with class and self-control, and not only confronting her at marriage counseling but taking the initiative and holding her accountable not only to her cheating but that she no longer would hostage your heart and soul. And in the very place where many in your position as a man the narrative would spin in her favor, you took control not only from your ex but the therapist as well. This was your true therapy. You took the steps in reclaiming your life back. I couldn't be more proud, my man. I know it hurts right now because taking down that wall when crumbling is draining, but you will survive this. You will rebuild to be something new, stronger, more powerful, and I guarantee you this is the moment where your life begins again. Congrats to you, man. It might not feel like a victory, but you have just laid the gauntlet down for a better world than yourself, brick by brick. You will find happiness again. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more shocking stories. Welcome to another Reddit video. This story is called, Wife Caught Cheating After 18 Years. I have never been to one of these forums, and I don't know if this will even help me, but I just recently found out that my wife of 18 years was cheating on me with one of her wealthy clients. She is an attorney. My wife went through great lengths to try and hide her affair. But, she made one crucial mistake. She forgot to delete the destinations in the car. When using the navigation system, they told me where she went and I took screenshots of all of it. And I had another gadget in her car. Once I found out, I didn't say anything. I wanted to get more concrete proof. I am a trust fund baby. So, I have access to money and I hired a very good private investigator. I put the private investigator on a retainer. I was sort of pay him as he gathered the evidence I needed. I had to be very careful because if my wife found out I was onto her, she would have become even more secretive and I may have never found out the truth. So, as the weeks went by, I never said anything to her. My demeanor didn't change. I acted like everything was normal. But, all the while I was getting more and more evidence of her affair. To top this all off, she is a divorce attorney. So, she knows all the tricks in the book to try and hide assets and to make sure she comes out on top in a divorce. But, little does she know, I have been planning my own little surprise for her. My private investigator was really good at getting surveillance footage of my wife cheating with this client of hers. He's very wealthy and he has a lot of power. But, what my wife didn't know is that I have been secretly recording her conversations with this man for a few weeks. I placed a very tiny voice-activated recorder in her car without her knowledge. Even though I am a trust fund baby, I was a mechanic at one time and I told her one day that I was going to clean her car and get the oil changed. That's when I placed a voice-activated recorder in her car. One of the most heartbreaking things I heard, she gave him oral in the back seat of her car. I thought to myself, I would never initiate kissing her again, never, but I still had to play dumb. Like I didn't know anything. A few more weeks went by and I had more than enough evidence to confront her with, but I wanted to wait for the right time. I was still unsure if I even wanted to confront her. I also secretly hired a moving company to come and move all of my stuff out of our house while she was at work. I didn't want any type of confrontation with her. I wanted to be long gone before she even got home from work. That day, she called and said she would be working late. When she told me that I said, "Okay, I love you. I will see you later." After getting off the phone, I called my private investigator and told him that my wife said she was working late. My private investigator said, "Okay, I will tell her and see what she is really up to." A few hours went by and I get a call from my private investigator. He said, "Well, it seems like your wife is not working late. She is currently at a hotel with her client." I told him to stay there and get as much evidence as possible. I wanted to be 100% sure before I took any kind of action. The private investigator said, "Okay, no problem." A few hours went by, the private investigator sent me a video clip of them walking into the room with her client's hand squeezing my wife's ass. I sent the private investigator a text telling him he doesn't need to stay there any longer. That's all the evidence I needed. After that, I continued packing my things while the moving company continued moving my furniture. It wasn't much. I had made arrangements to move into one of my vacation homes that I rent out every year, which was partially furnished. At about 4 p.m., my wife calls me and says she will be home in an hour or two. I told her, "Okay," and hung up the phone. I told the movers we had about an hour left, and I told them the address of the vacation home. They were done about 40 minutes later. I gave them the key and they headed to the house. I locked my old house, set the alarm and got in my car. My movers and I get to the vacation home. When my phone rings, it's my wife. She says she wants me to meet her at our favorite restaurant. I said, "Why?" She says, "I have something to tell you." I get to the restaurant and my wife is already there. She's sitting in a booth. I sit down and she looks at me and she has this weird look on her face. She finally says, "I'm pregnant." I was in shock. I didn't know what to say. I told her, "Are you sure? It's mine." She looks at me funny and says, "Why would you say that?" I look at her, take out my phone, show her the video clip of her and her client walking into the hotel room with her client, squeezing her ass. Then I told her, I know you were cheating on me. And I know you gave this client of yours oral in the back seat of your car. We can do this one of two ways. We can settle this out of court, or we can go to court and you will probably get demolished with all of the evidence I have. She didn't say a word for about a minute. Then she looks at me and says she will take her chances in court. All I said was, okay, got up and left. The following day, I conferred with a divorce attorney, showed him the evidence and told him to start the divorce process. That same day, she must have called my phone 1,000 times. Remember the day I left her at our favorite restaurant? She went home and found that I had moved out and bombarded my phone that day as well. But, I never responded to her. A few weeks later, my divorce attorney said that she was served with the divorce papers and all that's left now is the hearing. A few weeks after that, I get a call from her asking me to meet her for coffee. So I did. She asked me how I was doing and I said, I'm doing just fine. Thank you. Then she asked me if I would consider dropping the divorce. And I said, no. I told her, I can't trust you anymore. After 18 years of marriage, you decide to cross the line with the client and you want me to take you back. I'm sorry, but I can't do that. She begged and pleaded with me, even offered to give up her privacy and let me have access to everything. A few weeks later, I get a call from her again, saying she wants to meet for coffee. So, I met her again. This time she wanted to know if I would give her another chance. She kept saying, please, please, please. And I said, why? What benefit do I get? If I decided to give you another chance, she looked at me with this pitiful look on her face and said, because I love you. I just sat there looking at her for what seemed like an eternity. Then I got up and left. A few days later, I received a package in the mail from her. It contained a box of my favorite cigars and a note that said, I'm sorry. I thought about it for a few days and decided that I just couldn't do it. I had tears rolling down my face. I just couldn't see myself with her. She threw away 18 years for a client that she knew for only a month. I can't think or write anymore at this point. I am too mentally distraught. I promise I will come back with an update on my situation. This story is called Update Wife Caught Cheating After 18 Years. Hello. I am back with a quick update. My divorce isn't final yet. My wife asked me to give her another chance. She begged and pleaded with me after I showed her proof that I knew she was cheating on me. She has since asked me multiple times. Have I considered giving her another chance in my head? I said, I couldn't, but I just haven't told her yet. I don't think I can trust her, but I had a funny feeling. She was still cheating. So with my gut instinct, I called my private investigator and told him I wanted him to continue to follow her. A week goes by. He calls me and tells me he has not seen her with that client. She goes to work and goes home. He also tells me that when he follows her home, he stays for about 30 to 40 minutes to see if she leaves the house. According to him, she hasn't. Fast forward 3 weeks and my private investigator follows my wife home and he waited for 30 minutes. Then out of nowhere, he sees a car drive down to the house. He's never seen this car before. It's the guy she has been cheating with. He sends me a clip of this guy walking up to the door. He knocks on the door. My wife opens the door and kisses him. What are you doing, Bill? Can a man drink that much? Lamented neighbor Mrs. Hogreave. She looked reproachfully at Bill, who was like a son to her. I'm in grief, don't you know, Mrs. Hogreave? Bill whispered, crying and swaying at the table with the drink in his unsteady hand. His red swollen eyes looked distracted and vacant, his cheeks and chin were covered with long stubble, which made him look miserable and untidy. Mrs. Hogreave wrinkled her nose. Yes, you are grieving, but she's grieving too. The woman pointed her hand at the little crying girl huddled in the corner of the sofa, and looking from there frightenedly at her father. She may be 100 times more hurt and scared than you are. She's only 6 years old, and not only has her mother died, but her father has turned into a monster. Mrs. Hogreave stood in the middle of the room, her eyes sparkling angrily. She turned to the little girl and spoke to her. Now her voice sounded very soft and gentle. Come with me, Esther. Daddy will come and get you when he gets a little better. Esther immediately responded to her neighbor's affectionate appeal, ran up to her and wrapped her little arms around her. Her little eyes looked hopefully at the kind elderly woman. And you, Bill, get yourself cleaned up and stop drinking. Esther will stay with me for a while. And remember, you are the most dear person in the world to her now, and you have to think about her first now, and not about how you're hurt and miserable. Mrs. Hogreave took the girl and left. There was an oppressive silence in the house. Bill's hand reached for his glass, but he suppressed that impulse. Mrs. Hogreave is right. It is necessary to live at least for Esther. The man collapsed face down on the sofa and tried to forget himself in an anxious sleep. Before his eyes, as on a film, flew all his family life. Here is his beloved Helen, beautiful and happy in her wedding dress. She happily tells him, you and I are going to live happily ever after. And then suddenly a very recent picture came to mind in which she, pale, exhausted by illness, with a headscarf on her head, was speaking again. But now her voice sounded quiet and sad. You should take care of her, Esther. Don't leave her. Bill shuddered at these memories and cried again, this time of great shame in front of his wife for not coping. A few days later, he, clean-shaven and sober, stood on Mrs. Hogreave's doorstep. Hello, I've come for Esther, he said with excitement. Oh, you have come to your senses. The older woman looked at him sternly over her glasses. Well, come in, but you need to wait. I've put Esther to bed after lunch. She needs daytime sleep now more than ever. So you and I will drink tea meanwhile. I have baked donuts with her. Thank you, Mrs. Hargreave, for shaking me up. They sat at the table and talked quietly, reminiscing while little Esther was sleeping, curled up on the old couch. That's how my son used to sleep, Mrs. Hargreave said, looking at the girl. He was so cute. And then he had an accident at work. It was like I lost my meaning in life. I didn't know why I live, why I work. You are luckier than me, Bill. Look, there's the meaning of your life, sleeping on the couch. Esther woke up exactly 1 hour later. As soon as she opened her eyes, she immediately rushed off the couch and jumped on her father's lap. She happily stroked his shaven cheek, saying, "Daddy, my daddy is back." At this point, I would like, of course, to say that everything had settled down. But that would not be quite true. Sometimes Bill would get depressed again, and he would drink again. And once again, Mrs. Hargreave would take Esther to her place for a couple of days. Time went by. Esther went to school. She studied well, and Mrs. Hargreave was always ready to help if Bill suddenly went out of order for a few days. And then one day, Bill brought a woman home. "Daughter, meet Paula. She's going to live with us, and I hope you'll be friends with her." A beautiful tall woman looked at the girl, slightly squinting her eyes and smiling. She was as bright as a candy wrapper, and Esther smiled at her. Finally, Daddy will be happy. He will stop drinking and crying at night, thought the little girl. And she was right. Her father adored his new wife. But her relationship with Paula did not work out. Everything was fine in front of her father. Paula was usually smiling and talking affectionately to the girl. But when he was away, she literally abused the child. Esther could not understand why her stepmother hated her so much. Not a day went by that Paula did not scold or humiliate her. The girl said nothing to her father. She thought that if Paula left, her father would get sick again, and he would start drinking and crying at night. Noticing that her stepdaughter unrequitedly accepts all the abuse, the woman became brazen and sometimes began to beat Esther for the smallest mischief. Each time, the slaps grew stronger and more painful. "What is this?" asked Bill once, noticing a bruise on the daughter's arm. But Esther only lowered her eyes to the floor, hiding her tears, and said that she had fallen accidentally. She saw her stepmother looking at her triumphantly and haughtily, standing at the window and folding her arms across her chest. After that incident, Paula, remembering how her husband had found bruises on Esther's body, was now smarter and tried to beat her so that no marks were left. The little girl became thin, pale, and cried a lot. But still, she kept hiding the reason from her father. Then Bill decided to ask his wife about everything. "Paula, there's something wrong with Esther. Maybe she's sick," he suggested. "What's wrong with her? She should be punished. She's rude and lazy, doesn't even wash a cup after herself. She just mocks me. I treat her with all my heart, and she looks at me like a wolf." The whole time, Esther looked at her stepmother with her eyes goggling. She had no idea it was possible to lie like that. Esther said her father sternly, "What's going on? Why don't you listen to Paula? What do you want?" But the girl could not say anything. In shock, her eyes instantly filled with tears. "I want to go to my mummy." She finally shouted and ran to her room and stayed there until morning. It probably would have lasted a long time, or rather, as long as Esther's health could stand. But once again, Mrs. Hargreave intervened. She purposely spotted Bill rushing to work. "Hello, Mrs. Hargreave." The man was pleased to see his neighbor. "You've completely stopped coming to see us. In vain, both me and Esther are really missing you." "Oh, I tried to stop by the other day to get to know your wife and to talk to Esther, but right then I had to go home." "Why?" wondered Bill. "If I tell you, you wouldn't believe me anyway. You'd better come home early from work. Best when Esther comes home from school. You'll see everything with your own eyes." Bill was on his way to work, and his heart was not in the right place. There was something in his neighbor's words that made him uneasy, prevented him from thinking about anything else but what was going on at his house while he was away. Why has a good, obedient girl become frightened, withdrawn and worse at school? Paula says Esther is silly, but she isn't. She's always been praised at school, thought the man. A little later that day, Esther had barely come home from school when her stepmother met her at the door with a wet towel in her hand. "Well, come in, you poor thing," she hissed threateningly. "So, you want to go to your mother? Well, I'll give you such an opportunity. She's probably waiting for you there, you ungrateful little wretch." She slapped the girl on the back with a wet towel with a kind of rage. Esther cried, screaming in pain. "Stop it at once." Suddenly heard Bill's voice from the threshold. He decided to take his neighbor's advice after all, and what he saw made his hands shake. "Bill, darling, I didn't do it on purpose. She just drove me crazy. Let's give her to your mother or to an orphanage. It's not my fault." "I don't know why she makes me so angry," shouted Paula. "Are you crazy? An orphanage? I'll put you in jail. I never thought you were capable of such a thing." Bill rushed to his daughter. "Honey, tell me where it hurts. Forgive me, my little one." Esther hugged her father tightly around the neck and cried loudly. All the tears she had not cried for all that time were rolling out of her eyes in a hail of tears. Mrs. Hargreave quietly entered the room and looked with unconcealed contempt and hatred at Paula, who was packing her suitcase. "People like you should be imprisoned or isolated from society for life," she said to Esther's stepmother. But the woman only smirked in response. It's not my duty to take care of other women's children. So why did you marry him? You knew he had a daughter, didn't you? Resented the elderly woman. Are you really that silly? I just thought I'd eventually persuade Bill to put the girl in a boarding school. Get out, shouted the man, still continuing to hold the girl close to him. Otherwise, I'm not responsible for myself. Paula, with her head held high, rattling her 2 suitcases, walked away. Bill held Esther in his arms for a long time, saying, "Forgive me, my dear, that I didn't see or hear anything. You've been through so much. Remember, you must always tell me if you have something that worries you. I'm your daddy, and I'll do anything to make you happy. You're my joy, you're my life, and I love you more than anything in the world. And I love you very, very much, Daddy." A child psychologist worked with Esther for a long time afterward, and now the girl is fine. Bill did not marry again after this incident. It was enough for him once. He says that his daughter is dearer to him than anyone else in the world. And Mrs. Hargreaves is still helping them in the neighborhood. After that, I sent my wife a text and told her, I will not give her another chance. I will see you in divorce court. As of May 21, 2022, I don't have a date for my divorce hearing. That's all I have for now.